Is Europe worth saving?
Meow, Huples cat. This video will contain spoilers. For the first time since 2019, in 2023, me and Kitty went to the HotDocs festival in Toronto. There's literally hundreds of documentaries to see, and it's always a bit of hit and miss, but generally speaking, we're always very well satisfied with the documentaries we see. This May we saw 7. As you'll see, one was a little but the rest of them range from great to amazing. You may have trouble finding them, but any documentary that's made with passion and heart is always worth seeing. It gives you an insight to somebody else's mind and somebody else's lived experience, and that's always valuable. There will be a lot of prepper perspective in this because I think it's important to actually balance life and work and hobbies, and prepping is one of my hobbies. We arrived in Liberty Village and a wonderful Airbnb, and then we walked for an hour and a half at a very fast pace because Kitty took the directions and we got somewhat lost to the first movie. This was Trained to See, 3 Women at War. The audience numbers were sadly small. It was absolutely excellent documentary, definitely one of the best we saw. They just used the women's voices from letters and their own articles, and that was it. And they did it as a timeline from the start of the war, from the Americans' point of view in 1941. Of course, the war started a lot earlier than that for most people in the world. And it went up until 1945.
This is going to be a nice long war. Sooner or later, they're going to want to make it popular. And then folks like us can work.
They did encounter quite a bit of sexism trying to get into the combat zones to film and report, but what they gave to war corresponding was a human aspect that had previously just been missing. We literally followed their journey from the excitement of the war starting and wanting to be part of it and cover it because that's what they were trained to do, and in one case had been doing previously in other wars.
The world is moving along at such an exciting pace that I want to be right there, photographing it every possible minute of the year.
To the fear, the abject fear of being under fire, to the nonchalance of being under fire, to the acceptance of violence and death all around them.
I was the only photographer for miles around, and I now owned a private war.
To the utter appalling horror of victory when the apocalypse of the Holocaust was uncovered.
But how quickly this feeling of immunity vanishes when one sees people killed.
From a prepping point of view, don't be too anxious to fight. It probably isn't the best thing to do. It's going to definitely mess up your life. And it did to some degree mess up all 3 of these women's life. In one case really, really badly. To the point it took to the 1970s before her son even knew that she had been a war correspondent in World War II.
It belongs to us because I am involved in mankind.
I'm never sure of what I'm going to do, or sometimes even aware of what I do. Only that I want that picture. It's great fun to see the bombs going if you hit something.
We see them under fire at a casino in Italy, we see a whole bunch of things, and it's quite dramatic. At the end of the war, they travel with the troops, mostly frontline troops, through France, Holland, Belgium, and into Germany. The death, destruction, hopelessness and starvation of Western Europe was apparent to these women, and it touched them. Being occupied for almost 5 years had really done a number on those countries. They were devastated and the people were now pretty much hopeless. Dead eyes, vacant. When they get to Germany, they find a population that's well fed, still has dogs because they're able to feed them, and are living in cellars full of looted food, furs and jewellery and artworks from Western Europe. And the entire population hated Hitler and is trying to say, you've liberated us, thank you for liberating us. And they don't buy it. The visceral hatred of the German people in 1945 by the people that had been covering the war is very apparent in the video.
They're the enemy. The first few days were full of horrifying encounters.
No time to think about it or interpret it. Just rush to photograph it, write it, cable it. Think about it later.
Of course, time would go on and we'd find new enemies to hate, and our previous enemies that we hated now become our firm friends. But that's also a lesson of this. Don't be so firm in hating other people. The director is Swiss, but she lives in Germany and she has a German husband and German children. And she said, because she actually comes and talks after the movie, a lot of these do that at the HotDocs, which is why it's so great to go, that one of the things she wanted to do was to make sure that the imagery they used of the Holocaust was fresh and new, because she felt it was stale. She felt it was the same pictures, the same video clips over and over and over, and to the point where people don't really even see it anymore. And boy, did she do that.
I look at anything you see because I do not admit that one can turn away. I must have a rest.
I'm not ashamed to say I cried twice. The inhumanity and pointlessness of pouring flammable fluids on people and burning them to death the day before liberation is appalling. And the imagery, I warn you, is extremely visceral.
Is Europe worth saving?
What next? What next, indeed?
And it's true imagery. One of the things General Patton did, and he did some strange things in the war, was he forced the population to go through Dachau because they were all in denial. Nobody knew about this, and it was just Hitler that did it, and they weren't Hitler. And he made them go through, but because of the cleanup that had already been done, largely by the inmates, they'd actually made puppets to show the hangings and all the rest of the stuff they found when they liberated Dachau. And that was really interesting to me because I've seen the same video and it's portrayed as real people, and actually a lot of it is dummies faked up to show the German population what was going on. However, there is plenty of appalling scenes. One of the most visceral scenes is the ovens that they used, and usually you see like a few ribs or a skull or something like that, and it's blurry. The photographs these women took were not blurry, and you can clearly see burned human beings. It's just awful. And one of the terrible scenes is when one of the very small manufacturers burned its slave population to death the day before liberation, and a few of them, like a handful, managed to escape, and they drifted back because when they left that place they weren't getting any help from the German population, so they drifted back starving and very, very thirsty, and they're clutching the burned remnants of the friends that they'd suffered with for months and years. And it was so pointless. It wasn't a final solution. It was just awful, and there's no excuse for that sort of behaviour, and it happens. And I firmly believe that if Canada had been invaded and America had been invaded and we'd lost to Germany or Japan or both, over time the Japanese in our internment camps probably would have suffered a fate equal to, but not exactly the same as the people of Europe suffered. So the only real disappointment was the next film the next day, 5 Seasons of Innocence, set as a time period during the early part of the civil war in Syria, filmed from within Syria, and I was really looking forward to it, and it was kind of garbage. It wasn't very well made as a film, and the way their perspectives wasn't very good. Overall, it seemed to me it was a grief perspective that this Syrian who had escaped and her friends had chosen to stay and fight, she actually probably felt guilty, and I think there's a few things in the film that suggest that. I'm not just making that up. And she found her old footage that wasn't even for a documentary or a film, just home videos, and spliced them all together and made this film that kind of said, isn't it bad? There were a few points in the film, like more than 3, where I was like, come on, tell me more. And you didn't get it, and that's really, really annoying in a documentary. There was one blatant aspect of propaganda in the film where they showed an ammunition box printed in English, and the ammunition was 7.62mm, and they said, this is Russian ammo. And the actual filming segment didn't look like it actually was from that place at that time. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. There was a throwaway scene later on where one of the Syrian people actually clearly says that NATO is evil and what NATO's done is terrible to Syria. And this is not a government person saying this. This is part of that unofficial and very, very much endangered opposition. But it was an interesting take on how pampered and rich elite people actually deal with civil war of such a monstrous scale that Syria has experienced. And thankfully Syria, most of Syria, is now trying to get out of that. And yes, Canada did bomb Syria, and that's never mentioned in the film, and never mentioned at all. And I think it was important for the audience to be told Canada bombed northern Syria to support the insurrectionists, who at that time were Taliban. So it was an important perspective. It wasn't well done. I'd give it a miss. We then saw the only short film we saw. Sometimes they put little shorts in before the movies. The ones we saw were long, so we didn't get that, but we had one. Boy, was it good. It was called Shells, from Czechoslovakia. It's short, it's not much text. Basically, it starts with an old man in bed, and he's watching a dancer from years ago on TV, and the dance is incredible. He gets out of bed. At this point I kind of thought, I think it's him. He goes down a very depressing hospital corridor, he gets in an elevator with difficulty. Once he's in the elevator he starts doing the moves that we've just seen on the TV screen that he was watching. You see the man that was, and it's amazing. It's just amazing. And as it goes on he collapses inside the elevator. He can no longer do what he can do in his mind. His body's failed him. with age, and the walls contract on him. And it's a very powerful message that enjoy life while you can, because you cannot maintain it because the body fails. And it was very, very interesting. And the last scene is him just eating his porridge alone, isolated, with other old people around him also eating their porridge alone, isolated. And you're left thinking, what were those people's lives like? Because what I'm seeing now is not what they were, and definitely isn't who they are. Really powerful. And the main feature was Much Ado About Dying, and I was really looking forward to this, and the trailer was good.
When life's good, it's very, very good. When it's bad, it's horrid.
The actual film itself was not as comedic as the trailer portrays, which was fine.
I'm a bubbly person.
And he wants to give his kingdom away to a hot anthropology student he's fallen in love with.
But it was really an interesting journey, showing a very old man who was gay and had lots of money, just frittering it away, wasting it, refusing not to hoard, refusing to be safe, refusing to move out of his home, a nephew who interrupted his life to look after this uncle.
What do you do if your uncle says he's dying and you're the only person in the world that can look after him?
I'm just saying, I think it's OTT to buy 4 of everything.
Don't think like that.
Have you got any more of these big ones, please?
1, 2, 3, 4 is OTT, be careful. But if you go 6, 7, then you're buying too much stuff.
Who was pretty ineffectual in looking after the uncle in terms of what we would think, in terms of getting him rehomed and all the rest of it. And it's a very interesting journey from this man, and his house catches fire and he has neighbours who are a bit iffy but actually are supportive. It's very fascinating. It's very fascinating about how you actually deal with demented elderly who aren't that demented and who are very, very active and demanding to do stuff that they're not really dealing with very well anymore.
Ooh, that was my finger.
It wasn't.
You know, bossy uncle and
Bossy nephew.
and bossy nephew. Absolutely. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players.
What do you do when you're dragged into a mess that's exactly like the Shakespeare plays that he used to act in?
It's great, and you should watch that one. Much Ado About Dying. I'm pretty sure it's going to get a wide audience somewhere out there because it doesn't cover any of the hot political buttons. Now, the film about the man who stole Einstein's brain.
Oh my God, somebody stole Einstein's brain.
I knew the backstory, so I enjoyed it. Kitty didn't really know the backstory, she really enjoyed it. And I'm not going to spoil it too much for you, but the brain wasn't stolen, and it's a very interesting way of looking at science and what happens after death.
And yet his brain somehow ended up going right off the grid.
Portions of Albert Einstein's brain have turned up in a laboratory.
Is Einstein's brain in a beer cooler? I didn't quite know what to think about that.
And again, it does raise issues of consent. Einstein never consented to have his brain removed. His brain was just taken.
I have no regrets about keeping it.
He would save the brain, and that it would only be used for scientific research.
And kept. Now, the Einstein family, the estate, knew about it and for 27 years were supportive of the guy who took it, because he was supposed to do research on this brain, but was never able to get anybody any interest in it until the late 80s. So that's also a fascinating story about how science evolves over time.
He went about distributing the brain out on a road trip along the highway to different scientists.
And anytime I had a friend over, come on, let me show you where the brain is. And we go down the stairs and into the back room, and there it is.
And it made me think, and it wasn't brought up in the film at all, about a lot of the heads and body parts of First Nations across the planet that still languish in cardboard boxes in our universities.
There it was. Einstein's brain.
As Kitty said, fact can often be stranger than fiction, and Einstein's brain is definitely fact that is way stranger than fiction. Then we saw Innocence, and Innocence is basically about how children in Israel are indoctrinated into believing the state of Israel is superior to other states around it, and are indoctrinated into being military.
ומה אני אעשה בצבא כשיגיע הזמן?
איפה להיות בצבא?
אני חלשה. אני פשוט אומרת לעצמי, דורון, את הולכת לקרבי. את חזקה. אבל לא באמת.
Like you see children say things like, I don't want to carry a rifle, I don't want to kill people in classrooms, and then they're isolated within the classroom in front of their peer group, and they're like 9 or 10, and are basically told, you don't love Israel.
כן, לא רוצה לעשות צבא, זה הדבר הכי פשרתי.
לאיזה עולם אתם מכינים אותנו? לאיזה חוקים אתם רוצים להתאים אותנו?
זה מוקש.
אפשר לצייר את הסמל של הצבא עם מלא של זית, אפשר לצייר חיילים וטנקים, מה שאתם מדמיינים. בשום אופן לא רוצה לצייר. לא.
And you see the development of those children, and you see their art, and you see their music, and you see everything going on as the child grows and has dreams and is articulated to video camera, and as time goes on, you see what happens.
כולם משחקים איזה משחק שאין לי כוחות להשתתף בו.
יום אחד, נשחה מחוץ לכל זה.
אני מתבונן סביבי וכולם נראים לי כמו רוצחים.
3, 4, המפקדת. 5, המפקדת. 6, המפקדת. תנסי ירייה אחת ואז...
It's about suicide, but it's not clearly about suicide, though it's entirely about suicide, but they don't warn anybody, and I found that really, really interesting. I watched Call Me Saul last night, and they have suicide warnings all over it. And the reality of suicide, people have to fight in the Israeli Defense Force who don't want to, or do things in the Israeli Defense Force that they don't like, so they figure the only way out is to kill themselves. It's really powerful.
למה שלא נשתחרר מהצבא וניסע מכאן? להיות חופשי. חופשי. אתה מבין מה זה להיות חופשי?
And you absolutely see why they have to join the IDF, but it's really hard not to. It's either that or you go to jail, and everybody around them is telling them that they have to do this. It's an important rite of passage. If you don't do it, you can't get a good job, you can't do X, Y, and Z. You are in a military democracy. You don't fight for the military, you don't support Israel, you lose all the benefits. You also clearly see Hamas attacking Israel, and you see why they're attacking them, because they're taking people's homes that they've lived in for generations and throwing them out and then taunting the people. It's really powerful. It's very, very hard to watch this movie and feel anything but revulsion at what's happening to Palestine. You can claim that's propaganda and look at what they're doing to the Israelis, but you know, if you're continually expanding your border by violence, don't be surprised if you encounter violence. We then saw Praying for Armageddon, which is supposed to be about the fundamentalists, you know, the end times people.
I'm going to talk about war. The Bible is full of war. Jesus, he said, if you don't have a sword, buy one, because the time's coming you're going to need a sword.
When you see comments like "bring it on" in prepper channels, you know those people are psychopathic, hate you, and want you to die because they're going to be one of the 144,000 people who go to heaven, and you stay on the earth, and you have to experience nuclear war, and you have to experience her horror on earth.
The end of time. When is that? That's right now. The next thing that's about to happen is the return of the Lord Jesus Christ.
In Christ's holy name we pray.
Not a very nice religion, and definitely not what the New Testament preaches.
We're called to be warriors, and we need you to get in the fight.
You see how they've actually infiltrated the American government at all levels. You see how they're infiltrating the military. You see that their only goal in life is to get Israel to completely control Jerusalem, so Jesus will come back and kill all the Israelis who don't convert to Christianity and destroy the rest of the world horribly and painfully, but that's fine because they will quickly go to heaven.
We who are evangelical Christians are going to have a true friend in the White House.
They are looking for the U.S. relationship with Israel, ultimately, to bring about Armageddon, so that if the shit really hits the fan, we're in it immediately.
They can't wait to go to heaven, and they really are trying to get Armageddon to start by a nuclear war because they believe that they will be saved.
There have been two nations created to glorify God, Israel and the United States of America.
Israel will not go down because of us. No one will go down that is our ally, that is not trying to attack us and kill us.
I want to see Jesus slain the enemy and watch the blood run up to the bits of the horses. How many of y'all hear that things may change in this country?
I don't think if there is a God, that God's going to allow those types of people into heaven. Pretty sure not. But they're trying to condemn the rest of us to world war, and it's wrong. And if you see these end-timers around, slap them back, slap them down. They are deranged, psychopathic, nasty people. And it spends more than half the movie in Jerusalem, and that's quite fascinating what's going on there. But I'm not going to spoil that too much. Again, it's about expansion. It's about ethnic cleansing. It's hard to watch, and I think it's an important documentary to watch. It's definitely given me an insight, a lot more of an insight into the end timers that I encounter on prepper channels. You can believe in the Bible, you can believe the end times are coming, but to want it to come, to try and actively pay cash to get it to come about, you are a psycho. Now, I knew the last film would be light, and it was. It was also really, really well done. The Lebanese burger mafia.
It's a chain restaurant that went wrong, and the food is, there's no quality control between them, but I love them.
It's been a photocopy of a photocopy of a print of a photocopy. There's all these variations, and I don't know if that's part of the charm.
There is no actual system. Everybody's kind of doing their own thing with Burger Baron.
It's about how the Burger Baron chain collapsed in Canada and how it ended up being a non-chain franchise that you could just do, you could just copy it because it wasn't under any copyright laws, and about how the Lebanese who fled Israel's aggression in Lebanon actually came to Canada and used those chains to actually create new lives.
People, I'm sure, that thought maybe we were doing something legal. It's almost like the burger mafia.
It's a territorial business. My burger brand is better than his burger brand. It was a civil war.
My best friends are Christians. My best friends are Muslims. And suddenly, each one have to disappear.
Your only way out is the water.
We lost everything. We decided this is not the place to raise a family.
And how their children are fundamentally different. It's a really good documentary. It's quite slow paced, but it's really interesting. It doesn't make me want to eat meat, but it really made me see how a simple thing like giving an immigrant the opportunity to fill a gap that nobody else here wants to do can be absolutely fundamentally changing both to their lives and to the next generation and the next generation.
I was thinking I'll give them empire of a restaurant. I'm the owner. And whatever happened, it's my decision.
We have such a strong independence. A franchise system doesn't really work well with us.
I run everything on my own. I don't deal nothing with a company, franchise, I do nothing. I run on my own.
I think the biggest obstacle is trying to band everyone together to realize that things could be stronger as opposed to just being a meme.
Well, as promised, that is my review of HotDocs 2023 in Toronto. We only went to 7 films, but they were great. Only one was dodgy. I do recommend if you're able to go to a film festival or a documentary festival in your own town, take some time and do it. It's really important. It's important to actually support documentary filmmakers who aren't just being funded by Netflix. Remember, a lot of things in life are funded by money. Money comes from capital. Capital comes from fossil fuel extraction, and it's going to kill us all. Try and see a fundamentally different point of view. You may or may not find it comfortable, and certainly the Jewish members of the audience found some of the films we saw very uncomfortable because it wasn't faked, and it was just, this is what they're doing, and it was pretty awful, and it's pretty hard to take. Hope you enjoyed this review. Thanks for watching. Toodles. This video has been a 2023 Tiny Puppy production.